Quick reminder before we get started. We're trying to do 10 minutes or less on each team. This isn't going to be surface level analysis, but we just want to get into the meat and potatoes of what they could spend, what maybe they need, or names that they could target. And I just want to reiterate, this free agency class is abysmal because I do think the way that teams are building through free agency is changing. Sign and trades are probably more in vogue. And I think just signing players to extensions is more in vogue and then moving them later. But that's why we're not spending 50 minutes on your team. That will happen when we eventually do our preseason look aheads, not forecasts or primers or previews, but look aheads. The first team up in the Northwest Division, because Grant and I want to live on the edge, and we're going to go alphabetically. We made it 5 for 5 in the Pacific Division without any issues. We'll see if this continues. So first up in the Northwest is the Portland. No, I'm just kidding. The Denver Nuggets. Their vitals. I'm starting the clock now. Their key free agents are DeMarcus Cousins, non-bird. They have full bird rights on Bryn Forbes, and they have early bird rights on Austin Rivers. Their biggest spending tool is going to be the mini MLE, assuming, of course, that they use it, which the JaMychal Green trade that they made suggests that they maybe won't. And they are within $7 million of the luxury tax at this recording, so there might be other salary dumps involved. That being said, if we're getting into their biggest needs, priorities, they still need point of attack defense. You could always, Nikola Jokic can make it work without shooting, but you need more knockdown shooters on this team. I want to know if they're going to duck the tax because of how close they are to it. And then are they going to punt on the mini MLE as a result? Grant, any thematic elements that you're harping on leading into Denver's free agency / offseason?
Can I say first that when you pretended to start with Portland, I had a genuine thought of oh shit, do I not know which teams are in this division? Because, the alphabet stuff, you got me. No, overarching Denver thoughts are, you hit the big ones. To me, in a nutshell, this is a legit contender and taxpayer, quote unquote, maybe at the moment, probably won't be. I think they're a couple defenders away from having a good enough operation on that end to complement what I think, assuming everybody's healthy, will be, top 5, top 3 offense in the league. So they should be a team that is willing to spend and look for, every possible road to improve. I think, as you alluded to, that's probably not going to be the case. But their focus needs to be on defense at every position. Aaron Gordon can't guard everybody. He's a little overrated in my mind as a defender, but he's clearly the best defender on the team.
Spicy. I feel like he's underrated because they've abused the scope of his defensive versatility. He should not be basically a primary point of attack guy.
Well, maybe that's the issue. Maybe we're both right, and it's because he's being asked to do things that is just beyond what's reasonable for anybody, and he just can't do them. So, but look, yeah, I think we agree. They've got, especially if you're talking about Jamal Murray coming off an ACL. We just saw Klay Thompson. Apples and oranges to some extent, but where you seem to lose it is your lateral quickness, I think, at least in the first year back. So Jamal Murray, I think, is going to have some backsliding defensively. Michael Porter Jr. was not a good defender to begin with. After a year off-ish, I think that's going to be another problem. So defense, shooting would be nice, but I think free agency.
I say they need knockdown shooting. Michael Porter Jr. might not be one of the best shooters in the NBA, technically, and he is. I will say, I think he might be, I don't know anymore, but he was really good when I was watching him towards the tail end of the previous 2020, 2021. What the hell is time at this point? His help defense got a lot better, and he felt like someone who could make a bunch of plays. As you mentioned, though, coming back from this back injury, is he even still able to make those types of plays?
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to start. I think, we should talk to, we talked a little bit about it in the Pacific Division. Monte Morris is someone that profiles potentially as a trade candidate, both because he's going to be in demand and as a tax ducking mechanism. I think Will Barton is another person they might think about trying to move.
If you need to tax dump, that is the guy that you're figuring out a way to get a cheaper player for. If you taxed up Monte Morris, I know I love Monte Morris. I named Bones Highland as one of the top trade assets in the NBA this summer. If the Nuggets wanted to make an all-in play, which they clearly do not, you do not. I understand. And I think Bones Highland's going to end up being actually a really good floor general. The passing and his command of the ball. That's not something I knew about him when he was coming out of college. If they dump Monte Morris, you want to talk about a rant? I will go on one.
Do you think What do you think? I know we're supposed to be doing free agency. Let's talk about free agency first, and what who they should be targeting before we get to like what's.
I have the name for you, and I bet you we both have this name on our list.
Okay, you go ahead.
Bruce Brown.
Yeah, he's on my list for sure.
Probably out of their price range if they won't use them in the MLE though.
Right. Well, I think, and like, because you have to associate the two because they're sort of similar. Gary Payton is obviously the other guy. I think they should be just like, take all our money if well, the limited supply that there is. But actually, I thought, this is just me. Because I don't know why I like the full circle nature of it, but Gary Harris, right? Like, just bring him back. He's not your shutdown guy necessarily, but through his career, he's been he's been a good defender. And he's had seasons where his best seasons were in Denver where he made shots. I think, especially if Barton goes any place and you can bring Harris back for, depending on where they get, maybe they can use the MLE or at least the mini. I think, it's just Barton doesn't really provide a lot of what they need at this point, assuming all their offensive big guns are back. And so Harris just being a more balanced role playing type, I think I like him. I thought that was going to be the name you were going to use. I'm glad you didn't, so I could do it.
Wait, what was that? I don't think I heard that last name. Gary Harris is what you thought I was going to use?
Yeah.
Do you think so? Gary Harris shot almost 50% on drives this year, shot well from three, defended really well in Orlando. You don't think he would get non-taxpayer mid-level?
I don't know. I think the fact that Orlando couldn't trade him for anything suggests that, he was making 20 million, so that's a little. he was expiring, but you'd think they could have got something for him.
Maybe they're going to bring him back.
What's that?
Maybe they're going to bring him back. This is the Paolo Banchero era Orlando Magic that we're talking about. They might have aspirations to win the 2023 title.
I would. Can I bet that they won't win the title?
I don't know what the return on that would be, but I'm sure you could.
So I have another target for them. I don't know if we were recording when I mentioned this guy for other teams, but Michael Carter-Williams is someone I think is gettable for the minimum or even like non-guaranteed level based on his injury history. And basically, if you go through, it's just a quick and dirty thing, but like pull up his cleaning glass page, and other than like his points per shot attempt rankings and general shooting stuff, like go to the defense page, and he's just like 80th and 90th percentile in block rate, steal rate, defensive rebounding, offensive rebounding, just like all the other stuff, which on this team, all the other stuff is really what is like lacking. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a real value play. This will extend to, I'm going to use Michael Carter-Williams several times just because I feel like everybody.
I didn't expect him to be your favorite free agent of the summer, but if anyone's listened to the previous other look-aheads, Michael Carter-Williams has come up quite a bit.
Except I'm not willing to say anyone should pay him more than the minimum. So I'm not sure how much favor I'm really showing him. Derek Jones Jr., another guy, I think just get someone out there that's athletic and can move around and defend a little bit. So those are kind of who I'm looking at for them. Do you have anyone that I missed?
No. And I think my issue with them is I very much feel like they're not going to use their mini MLE. And
it's a bummer.
That makes me like rule out Bruce Brown, gone. If you're getting Gary Harris for less than the mini MLE, I'm calling shenanigans on that too, because he's worth at least the mini MLE after the year he just had. So, and if you're not going to use that, just like, what are the names? You already mentioned them. Like, it's Michael Carter-Williams. It's, and I think the issue here is too, is, I don't even think if they, insofar, I told you I was going to bring him up, but like insofar as the Dallas lets him hit free agency, I believe his salary is non-guaranteed for next year. Frank Ntilikina is probably going to go for more than the minimum this year. I think he flashed enough in Dallas to do that. I would assume they'll guarantee his $2 million salary. What about Derek Jones Jr.? They already traded Green. They still have Jeff Green there as well. But like what is Zeke Naji? I think they view him, it feels like, as a 4. And maybe a Zeke Naji, Derek Jones Jr. front court actually makes a bunch of sense, because Derek Jones Jr. played well in some small ball 5 duty last year with Chicago. So he could be a minimum guy. I don't know if he would, like, maybe I'm underrating Derek Jones Jr., but he is such unless you put him in transition or figure out ways to get him going downhill, he's just not an offensive asset. And so I could see his market sort of, deflating.
Well, I think I don't know what he's worth. I think the full mid-level is not that's an issue here, probably is too much. Mini mid-level, like, I'd feel okay about it. But I do think the fit is pretty good. I mean, I don't know how much he would play with Jokic, but with the spacing that team figures to have, And with Jokic just like making everyone better, a guy that is just a pure athlete that can cut, that can run, like it's hard to think of a spot that would really feature the things Jones Jr. does well more effectively than Denver. Offensively, defensively, I kind of feel like I think he would help for sure, but I kind of feel like, in my mind at least, I keep thinking of the Derrick Jones Jr. at the top of the Miami zone like 3 years ago, and that was like a perfect position for success for him, and that hasn't really, no surprise that hasn't been replicated since then. I like the fit of him. The cost is going to be tough. I don't know. It's hard to project what his market's going to be.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of tough to project what the Nuggets are going to spend. Do you see a team, because I do think this is part of their free agency, do you see a team that you think could be willing to take like a Will Barton, who's making, I think he's around 15 million, and he's a really good player when he's healthy. And last year it felt like Nuggets fans were infinitely frustrated with him. He's actually making 16. That is a really tough number to work out, but he can give you some real scoring juice and just like second, like tertiary ball handling there. But that number is which is why they could end up salary dumping Monte Morris, because there are an infinite number of teams I think would take him. And standing out, like, India's cap space, are they willing to punt on some of it for Will Barton? Does Detroit use all of their cap space? And he's a player that can help you without sort of ruining a stealth tank if you're trying to go that route. But I also don't know, like, are there worse contracts out there that like you could flip him for, but you don't want worse contracts. You want cheaper contracts. And so it's just, the mechanisms of a Will Barton trade are very complicated unless the Nuggets are the aggressors in trying to acquire someone. And it just feels like they're going to go the opposite route and just try and cut their tax bill.
Yeah, now you really got me in the weeds trying to think of where Will Barton would be like hugely helpful. Yeah, I don't know. That's tough. It's because you got to give back significant salary, and what at that number is to a certain team like in greater supply or greater demand than like a guy who's just kind of a backcourt scorer like that, that isn't really big enough to guard multiple positions. Like that's
what would be interesting, and it only cuts it's less than 4 million, and I think you need to include something. A Will Barton for Josh Richardson swap would make a lot of sense, just because the Spurs can do really whatever, and Barton's the more creative offensive player. And then they're both contracts only a year. And then Richardson, really, that'll help your defense. And I thought he quietly had a good season last year. And so I had thought a lot about that. I just don't know what you need to attach, because no, I don't want to give up Zeke Naji for Josh Richardson probably. And you're certainly not going to give up Bones Highland in that deal, but can you? And I think that they've traded, like, Denver's second round pick cachet is not, the word I'm looking for here is enviable at the moment. The first second round pick they could trade is actually in 2024, I believe. So, they have more seconds than I thought. I don't know why I thought they had less, but like, is seconds enough to attach to that to make it work? I'd be curious, but that is the scenario I had zeroed in on personally.
Yeah, I that could work. I think I forget who you mentioned as a possible trade option for Jordan Clarkson. Was it Phoenix or somewhere that needs like another point of attack, like scoring guard? Anywhere Clippers. That's the case.
Yeah, the Clippers.
So maybe Barton. I mean, Barton's not your conventional playmaker, but anywhere you're thinking about someone like Jordan Clarkson, I think Barton might make some sense. I think Clarkson's probably better, but or at least is better at the specialty that he has.
This is all to say, I think, as we already went over on the Nuggets before we move on, is they're probably going to our collective guess is like they're going to focus on minimum signings, and I would expect them. Maybe it won't be over the offseason, but by the end of next year, they will have ducked the tax.
Oh yeah, bank on that. One way or the other, I think they're getting under.